With United States like treasuries and other very liquid bonds, there's this notion of cash and cash-like instruments, and these cash-like instruments are effectively treated like cash inside of this context, right? Like whether you own $10 or you own $10 worth of bonds, like many institutions will basically count that as the same because of how liquid the bond market is. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to here. And there's a definition of money out there. Money is the most saleable good. It is the easiest to sell wherever you are in the world without any sort of like loss of its value. And so what you're kind of alluding to is kind of what me and Ryan are saying, why we say ETH is money. This is where I kind of think that this conversation is pointing to. I wonder what you think about the idea of, this is what money is, and Ether is pointing towards being the money of the internet.
So I struggle with the money point because
people get hung up on the money word all the time.
And let me tell you why I get hung up on it. So in the years I've been trying to learn about money, either for my own reasons, for my books, or for my class, it never ceases to amaze me how like the more you study the history of money, the more nuance there is to it. Mm-hmm. And while you can, there's the academic stuff that I teach in my money lecture, the properties of money, the characteristics of money, the types of money, yada, yada, yada. But really, like, anytime you come up with a rule that says money is this, you can probably find a society, a major global important society somewhere that was definitely not their money. And maybe their money was something that today we wouldn't consider money. And just money is such a social thing. At the end of the day, it's like we all know, Yuval Harari, it's the ultimate social technology and human invention. It's so hard to put brackets around social things. Like I also joke with students that like if someone asks me what is money, I ask them what is art. And then it's like, art is whatever ends up being art. That's my definition of art. And a lot of times, like what one generation says is definitely not art, the next generation is like, that's absolutely art. And I think money could work that way. So I think ETH has very strong moneyness properties, but I think the easier question to answer, David, is what's an asset? The asset question is like you bringing it down to earth. It's not as much up in the ether, pardon the pun. I think ETH is going to be the major asset if we project everything forward. Now, a lot could go wrong, right? It's still early. It's possible that the Ethereum community and the roadmap takes some wrong turns. It's possible that I'm wrong. I've been wrong about things before. But if we project forward and the few requirements that I said come true, one is like on-chain is better than off-chain. I think most people in crypto would agree with that. Two, that hierarchical settlement is better than monolithic. Let's say that debate's 50-50 right now. And then three, that all assets eventually get tokenized and moved on chain. We're going to need something that's the glue that holds all of this together, right? And that's like the role that dollars and treasuries play in the global economy today, right? It's not just that, like we think of dollars as a reserve currency, other countries keep their reserves in dollars. Yes, but the dollar is also the greatest source of credit, right? Like there are other major currencies that central banks hold as foreign reserves, but like people don't go and borrow in them, right? Like one of the reasons the dollar perpetuates itself as the global reserve currency, even though you could argue we as America are doing things that's going to harm that status, is if you want to go and borrow, you got to borrow in dollars, right? Because just the liquidity is there, the interest rate is low, a lot of capital available. I think ETH is currently the best candidate to be that in a DeFi-centric world to come.
I still haven't heard anything, Omid, I disagree with in this entire episode.
To me, that's money.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
we should keep going then.
Yeah,
it's scary if we agree on everything.
What I think is really interesting is this idea of high quality liquid asset is basically you're saying if you're betting on DeFi, like truly decentralized finance across all of these different layer 2 economies, right? And you're not relying on an intermediary. And if that like comes to fruition, then you're going to need a collateral asset Justin Drake has come on. We've called it economic bandwidth before. You could call it money, high moneyness if you wish, or a high quality liquid asset. And that's going to propagate. And I want to get back to what's so interesting about that is once you have this, you could call it an internet bond, right? It sort of serves as almost the way treasuries do, the way T-bill does, where it's like, the risk-free rate is, whatever treasury is paying out. Well, the risk-free rate of capital on the internet could be the ETH staking rate, which would be really interesting if you get the depth of liquidity here. And you can really see how transformative and powerful that this concept could be. One sacrifice in this whole modular design that we're sort of making, and the emphasis on kind of like the settlement layer, is some of those transaction fees are going to layer twos, which are able to capture, at least right now, some portion of MEV and some portion of block inclusion fees, right? And so in the short run, we're actually seeing ETH less performant as a capital asset, an ability to kind of like throw off cash. And this goes back to the question I was also asking, which is like, are L2s parasitic? I mean, I think my answer, let's see if we agree here. My answer to that would be like, in the short run, sure, if you're just looking at ETH from a cash flow perspective, right? L2s are going to consume some of that cash. But by the way, that's not really sustainable for L2s. I think at the fullness of time, MEV goes to apps, not L2s themselves, but more MEV flows to apps. And then after that, more like it won't be sustainable for the apps to capture it all. It'll flow to kind of like users, right? And we'll have this downstream effect. So I don't think any transaction fees for any blockchain are like infinitely sustainable for all time. Like the take rate is going to get lower and lower as this Cambrian explosion of competitive pressures like propagate. And so all you're left with is money. So if your layer one asset is not a good money, it ain't worth nothing. Is kind of my like taking the fullness of time. Of course, that's a hyperbolic way of saying it, but I sort of believe that. Anyway, back to the L2s are parasitic approach or take. My take would be that L2s might look somewhat parasitic in the short run in that they're taking some of the fee capture from Ethereum as the base layer is expanding block space. But what ETH gets in return, ETH the asset that is monetary premium, is more status as a high quality liquid asset propagated across all of these layer two economies that are just in their infancy, but are going to be absolutely massive. And that's how I value ETH, almost similar to Bitcoin. It's like a monetary asset, right? What's your take on that? You like the L2s are parasitic question. Do you think they are?
No. I think that goes back to that tweet of mine that you mentioned, that you only, if you believe that, you think that a almost fully centralized block space and an almost fully centralized rollup is just as good as on ETH L1, right? I mean, first of all, actually before that, just financially speaking, if you're trading meme coins on Base and paying, I don't know what the fees on Base are right now, but it's sub 1 cent probably per transaction. And the same trade on L1 would cost $2. They cannot be parasitic because there's a lot of people who it wouldn't make sense for them to pay $2 to do the trade on the L1, right? So that's this idea you guys have covered before. It's induced demand. When you have the L2s, you get new users doing new kinds of activity that's just literally not possible on the L1 because it's not economical. The other thing is this provisioning of security. I think there are a lot of cool ways that L2s can become secure and decentralized and inherit the decentralization of the L1. You guys have done a great job of covering all that, especially in the beginning when like the rest of us are like, wait, what's an optimistic rollup and how's it different from a ZK1? But at the end of the day, they'll never be perfect. They will never have the same safety, liveness, and censorship resistance properties of the L1, partly because they're not going to optimize for that, right? Like Coinbase is not going to optimize for that. It shouldn't optimize for that with Base. So there's this debate of like, oh, people say, oh, Uniswap generates whatever in fees on ETH L1 today. It's the number one consumer of gas. All of that, it's going to move to Unichain. I'm not going to do that, right? Like if the bulk of my assets today live on Ethereum, my ETH-based assets. And when I do a trade, I'm okay paying high gas fees and waiting 12 seconds, et cetera, because I want those settlement assurances. Now, forget me, I'm not important. What's that pension fund that owns billions of dollars worth of crypto going to want to do? They're not just going to go to some L2 because it's cheaper. Okay, sure. They're actually like, I do think this is the future state, that institutions are going to have entire risk departments whose job it is to study and categorize the decentralization and settlement properties of different chains. Because that's what institutions do today. They look at the infrastructure they use, they look at the counterparties that they use, and they're very, very methodical and sophisticated about it. I think in the future they will do this, and they will say, well, we are big fish doing big things. We're going to live on L1. So I don't think DeFi, by the way, will ever leave L1, because there are always going to be whales. And some of these institutions, by the way, like in TradFi, what they're doing is batching and netting for like 10 million retail customers, right? Maybe they're a fintech and they're using L1 DeFi as their wholesale settlement layer, like their FedWire or DTCC. So in that regard, it's not parasitic. Are there some people today that are like, oh yeah, I was trading dog coins or whatever on ETH L1 because I had to, and now I'm moving to the L2 because it's cheaper and makes more sense for me? Sure. But that's just efficiency. It's not parasitic. And I do think the last point I'll make about, yes, I do think L2s will ultimately improve the quality of ETH, the asset or the money, however we categorize it. Let's zoom out for a second and set the financial aside. At the end of the day, I think one of the very novel things about blockchain networks is that the only way to capture the network effects is through the coin. This was another epiphany I had with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of the most valuable networks or platforms, if you will, on Earth. But there's no Bitcoin Inc. that owns it. And that's unprecedented, right? Every other valuable network, whether it's Visa, NASDAQ, WhatsApp, Twitter, whatever, there's a corporation that captures and extracts network effects. But with decentralized crypto networks, because they're decentralized, the coin becomes the only way to capture all the network effects. And that's this beautiful flywheel idea that Satoshi innovated, that, oh, if the coin is the thing that secures the networks and the thing that captures the network effects, then more activity means higher coin value, means more security, means more activity, right? And ultimately, like, TradFi people will come into me and be like, I want to invest in Bitcoin. Should I buy mining stocks or like a crypto exchange? I'm like, no, God. You should own Bitcoin.
Totally.
And if we get to this world, that I think we will, particularly because the L2 approach gives flexibility, right? So I think we're going to see more and more TradFi firms do their own L2s. I think we're going to see like gaming companies and media companies and chat apps all do their own L2s. All of that is going to really strengthen the network effects of Ethereum. And 5 years from now, when some TradFi late cover comes to me and be like, how do I invest in the success of the network effects of Ethereum? I'm going to be like, well, the only way to do it is to own ETH.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.